Well, I'm back in the studio again today with Mr. Ed Monk. He has several topics that he brings to Law Conference, and this is one that's coming up this year. Ed's going to talk to us about the foundations of our rights and our citizenship. Ed, what can you tell us?
I'm looking forward to this, JB. I taught high school history and government for 4 years. My undergraduate degree is in U.S. history, so this is something I care deeply about. A lot of Americans are proud about this stuff, but it's been so long ago that they learned about it that they need kind of a refresher. So that's what this is, a refresher back on our citizenships and our rights. And some people will say, history is boring, but I always say there is no boring history. There's only boring history teachers. So we're going to cover several documents, but don't let that make you think it's going to be boring. We're going to look at the Declaration of Independence. We're going to look at the U.S. Constitution. We're going to look at the Bill of Rights, which are first 10 amendments to that Constitution. And then we're going to look at the remaining amendments, 11 through 27. But also, instead of just looking at the documents and the words, we're going to look at why did the founders write those documents in the way they did? Why did they put in there what is in there? So we're going to look at their philosophy, but then also what happened in the history leading up to it that with their philosophy created these documents. So we'll start out with the Declaration of Independence. Had we not declared our independence, none of this would have happened. So that was a pretty miraculous thing. Most people are surprised to know that the first half of the Declaration of Independence had nothing to do with America and England. It's not specific. The first half of the Declaration of Independence is basically a discussion of the relationship between free humans and their government. And then after that's over, then they get into specifics about us and England and why we needed to separate. It's pretty fascinating, and that's a founding document because a lot of the beliefs that are in the first half of that declaration are going to show up in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So, of course, after you declare independence, you no longer have the previous government, so you have to form your own. And so that's what we did eventually with the Constitution. A lot of surprises here. A lot of people, when I used to hand out copies of the Constitution to my students when I taught it in high school, people are surprised. It was two pieces of paper. It was 4 pages, 2 pieces of paper front and back. The Constitution is not long. It's quite short. So the first thing we'll do is look at the Constitutional Convention when the now newly formed states, previous colonies, send people to Philadelphia. And there's a book called The Miracle at Philadelphia because that's really what this was. The Constitution being drafted and adopted was a miracle. So we'll look at that convention, 4 months in Philadelphia. We'll look at why they called it, what happened in it, some of the major debates they were arguing about, and then its final approval in the convention, but then it still had to go out and get ratified by the states. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the structure of the document itself, which is 7 articles or chapters, if you will. We'll look at how it structured our government into the 3 branches, the powers that it gave to each of the 3, and the way that they have checks and balances on each other. And then we'll look at the power that the founders gave to this new government. And we'll look at the powers that the Constitution says our federal government can do, very, very few powers that it says it absolutely must do, and then the powers that the Constitution absolutely forbids the federal government from doing. And we'll look a little bit at how the leaders in this new government are elected or appointed and how they get their jobs and how long their jobs last. So that's really the Constitution. And we'll see some things that have happened in the last few years and that are happening now that have a direct relationship to the powers of the Constitution and the limitations in the Constitutions. And then almost immediately after we started under this new Constitution, we had to start amending it and changing it. So the first thing we'll do is we'll look at the Bill of Rights, is what the name that we have given later to the first 10, and that is the only time that we as Americans added more than one amendment at a time. The first 10 were all added at the same time. So amendments 1 through 8 of the Bill of Rights all guarantee specific rights to citizens. Then Amendment 9 says, just because we have listed several rights doesn't mean there aren't others and that others aren't protected. Thank God they put that in there. And then we'll look at Amendment 10, which says, unlike 9, which says citizens have more rights than what listed here, Amendment 10 says the federal government only has those powers specifically enumerated, specifically listed in the Constitution. So people have more rights than what we've listed, but the federal government only has those powers listed. It's a limited government. So that's Amendments 1 through 10. Because of this audience, we'll do a special emphasis and go into more depth on Amendments 1, 2, which is keep and bear arms, and then Amendment 4. And just a little side note here on search and seizure, when I taught U.S. government in high school for 4 years, you've always got the student who's, not really interested, too cool to pay attention. But when I get to the part here where when can the cops search your car, that's when those students woke up and became alive and asked for extra work and asked a lot of questions. That's what they want to know, is when can they search my car? And then Amendments 11 through 27, the ones added after the Bill of Rights, were all added individually one at a time. They're not nearly as sexy as the Bill of Rights, so we won't spend as much time on it, but there's some important things in there, so we'll talk about that as well. But that's kind of what we're looking at for the day-long primer on a reminder for us on our rights of citizens.
A primer is right, and I'm looking forward to that. Me included. It's been a while since I've studied American history. Don't know how much I paid attention to it way back when I was in school. And so listening to you now, I think everybody will come away with a much deeper knowledge and understanding of what our Constitution is, and as you just mentioned, what it includes and what it gives us. Yeah, instead of relying what we hear on the internet or some other sources, this will be a good, solid education for all of us.
Yeah, we will look at exactly what the Constitution says, and I look at the Constitution as a cage that the founders tried to put around the government. Because just a little sneak peek here, one of the biggest common things among our founders is they thought that the natural tendency of any government is to grow. Not just that type of government or our type of government, any type of government. The natural tendency is to grow. So they tried to put a cage around the government, and then I would argue that the Bill of Rights added to it was the lock they tried to put on the cage.
Oh my.
To keep the government from going beyond its intended powers. But I think the lock's been picked several decades ago, and that's something that we'll talk about.
Wow. I'm looking forward to having a better understanding of that. And so, Ed, we look forward to seeing you at this year's conference. Thanks for the dedication of time. Once we put you on stage, we're going to have a hard time getting you off of there because there's lots to hear and do. Thanks for coming today, and we'll look forward to seeing you at conference.
I look forward to seeing you and the attendees there, JB.
Understanding the law, when it's okay to shoot. I have lost count of the number of hours I have been in law classes, and even though it's quote the same class, it's never the same.
Old School Gun School is a complete package. We're training in depth for the safe use of these firearms that we hope we never ever have to use.
When I need to use it, when I don't need to use it, and what to do afterwards.
This information is essential, and you need to have this information to make good decisions.
The other thing that's really impacted me was how much JB talks about conflict avoidance, how to de-escalate a situation, when somebody's being aggressive, how do you bring them back down? How do you move away, get out of the situation? So it's not about escalating the conflict, it's about de-escalating the conflict, trying to avoid conflict as much as possible.
I'm more careful with how I handle my guns now. I also am more comfortable with handling the guns.